Hello, folks. Welcome to Rational Science, the only site on the internet that does physics. Everybody else does descriptions, which means mathematics, as I call it. Mathematics. They do equations and move concepts around. So we have a difference in this channel from everybody else on the planet because we follow a different scientific method. Here's a summary just so you come up to speed. Okay, let's see if I can put this up here. This is the standard scientific method that we have today. That's the one they teach you in high school and in college. You observe, you make a prediction, you run some kind of experiment, measure. You can make a prediction as well, right there. Collect data for evidence, describe with an equation, discover a novel behavior, and then you present the evidence to the powers that be, which are your buddies, your colleagues. They vote. There's some kind of result they call knowledge, and you repeat the process to confirm the knowledge, that everything was done properly. You check all the dot all the X's, I'm sorry, dot all the I's and cross all the T's, so to speak. And then you invent a new gadget that proves the theory. Apparently, computers prove quantum, they say, okay? And then you award a prize to certified knowledge. You give them a Nobel Prize, and now the guy has certified knowledge. We throw all this in the trash can. We say, oh, that's a method of research and persuasion. None of it has anything at all to do with science. What does science do? Science, we have to explain a theory rationally to another human being. Okay? It could be to yourself, by the way. You could be talking in the mirror, no problem. You want to make sure you can explain it to someone else, so you first explain it to yourself. First thing you do in physics, as far as physics is concerned, you present the objects. What objects are going to be moving in your movie, in the one where you allegedly are going to explain some phenomenon of nature? You have to have objects. Without objects, you cannot do physics. And that golden principle, as I call it, no one has understood it or discovered it in thousands of years. Definitions, you have to define your terms. And mathematicians don't like to define their terms because they don't want to be tied to a given definition because it might be destroyed. So they either don't define or define loosely or define a word in 10 different ways so they can use it in different ways. In other words, they cover all the bases. No, in science we have one definition per word so we can follow the presentation. And then, you present the initial scene, could be the first few frames, so that you can present the foundation of your theory, what you're going to try to explain, essentially. And then you explain it. That's the theory. And so we have a different scientific method than everybody else. Everybody essentially does mathematics. And I'll tell you something, the reason we ended up with this notion of the scientific method or science, right, is because the mathematicians were in charge throughout all these years. Ever since Plato, at least, you would say. But for sure, 400 years ago, with the so-called scientific revolution, what happened was the mathematicians took over. And the mathematicians are all religious people. They're all people who move concepts around. Okay, and so that's very scary. And so what they've done is they created words that have no place in science. Terms of religion, I call them. Words such as energy and field and wave. Those words are not part of science. They can't be used as physical objects, which is exactly how the mathematicians use them to provide a physical interpretation to phenomena. And that's where we draw the line. We say physics, you need to use objects, and so the first word you need to define is the word object. If you cannot define the word object or don't understand what the word object means and all the implications it has, Well, you're not doing physics. Okay? So the first word you need to understand in physics is the word object. And that's why our site is a little different than everybody else's out there. And what I do in these lectures is divide them in three parts. First part, we do extinction. Why do I do extinction? I think it's a branch of physics, first of all. Okay, paleontology is a branch of physics. Paleontology is the science that studies death. Okay, paleontologist is a necrologist, a medical examiner. He's got to tell us how species in the past died. And the reason I've included in my lectures is because the mathematicians who ruled the world of so-called science, um, they believe we're going to live forever. They all think we're going to get out of this planet, conquer maybe, I don't know, Mars first, maybe Venus, and then move on maybe to other planets in the solar system, eventually to another star, and eventually we conquer the whole galaxy. And that's a little different than what I think is going to happen. I used to believe that, by the way, so I'm guilty. But I've changed my mind. After reasoning, I'm saying we're not ever going to reach the nearest star. I don't think we're ever going to colonize Mars or any other planets. We might travel there physically, might send some astronauts, a party of 5, 10 people. Yeah, we can do that probably. Okay, I don't even think we're going to be able to do that, but I think it's within our possibilities. We would be able to do something like that given enough time. Okay, and so I don't think we're going to go out of the solar system. And I don't think we have to wait for the sun to explode before we die. It's going to happen a lot sooner, like in a couple of years maybe. And the reason I believe that, I think the global economy is going to collapse. When, not if, but when it does, then we have nothing to trade. There will be no more trade. What dies is trade. Without trade, no one produces food, no one distributes food to the cities, and billions of people die in a matter of weeks. Okay, so that's the overall theory. So the first part of the lecture is about subjects related to extinction. Okay, that gives you a clue that something is wrong today. Okay, terribly wrong. Then the second part we do what physics proper. In this case, we're going to be looking at transparency and opacity. Today I'm going to cover a fifth variable. Okay, and then I'm going to answer some questions and comments that people made since last time. Okay, so let's get on with it. Let's go along with extinction. And I start with a little news headline that came out there, caught my eye, and it's this fellow. He's turned into a woman. He played a Bruce Jenner. He turned into a woman, and he went in there and did some kickboxing and beat up a girl. Okay, and so a lot of people have problems with this. Lots of people have problems with this. Among them, the girls that get beat up, because they say, well, you can look at the guy and he looks like a man. I mean, he's been a man. You could say this for 30 plus years, and he decided to make a sex change operation recently. I don't know how recently it was. But the bottom line is he's already built like a man. Now he's changed his sex, and he goes out there and fights these pure women, you can say, right? And people have problems with that. They say, look, you're matching men against women here, okay? So that's the argument out there. And so I'm going to play devil's advocate here, okay? So what? Why don't we make all sports unisex? Is there a problem with that? Boxing, American football, soccer, you name it, hockey, wrestling, weightlifting, javelin throw, discus throw, the whole works. Let's make it unisex. No differences. And you say, well, Bill, that's unfair. It's unfair because women are at a disadvantage. Well, in this day and age, first of all, women are asking for their rights. They want to be equals. So that's my first argument. Again, I'm going to play devil's advocate here. Women want to be our equals, right? We're all born equal. We all have the same rights. We all want to, you know, have no differences out there because men have dominated women for so long. Now women want to be equal to men. So, okay, here's their chance. I mean, let's get in the ring and fight, right? Now, that's one argument. The other argument is, women. There are many women that out there that are professionals, obviously, that can beat up a lot of men. Okay, this is just a fact. Okay, and you say, well, yeah, but you get the top contender for the women's championship against the top contender for the men's championship of boxing or whatever, one of those rough sports, and men are going to win. And my answer to you is today. Okay, today we might win or are likely to win. How about tomorrow? I mean, given enough time, let's assume extinction doesn't happen. We give it another 100 years and we open the floor for everybody. No more, none of this sex stuff, okay? It's all unisex for all sports. Will there be women that slowly come up the ranks and match the best of men? Okay, and I'm going to give you an example of what I'm talking about. Okay, if I can get it here, give me a second here. And it goes like this. Okay, this is the 100-meter dash in 1936. Okay, and what do we see? We see Jesse Owens, a famous guy. He won the 100-meter dash, and at the time, his record was 10.3 seconds, which was the world record. Guy who came in second, another American, Ralph Metcalf, and he came in just a tiny bit behind him, 10.4. Well, the record for women is held by Florence Griffin, and she did it in 10.49. And she would have slaughtered Martinez Ozendarp, who came in third in that race at 10.5. She would have beat him by 100th of a second. And then after that would come Elaine Thompson, who won it this year, and she would have beaten the crap out of the next three guys down there. So have women come up to speed over the years? And on top of that, just in case you didn't notice, we're talking about two black girls beating these white folks, How embarrassing, right? So given enough time, can women outrun men or run just as fast? Can they compete against men in strength and in stamina or whatever, all those? Maybe not in beauty. Men in beauty contests could be, the way the world's going. But I mean, we have a situation here where women have come up the ranks. Women have matched a lot of the records that men in the past held as, as sacred. And women today now would have beaten those men, 50, 100 years ago. And so women are also improving on their speeds and so on. Will there be a time where women and men are on the par? Should we have even male and female bathrooms, restrooms, public ones, or even private ones, for that matter, right? Is there any problem with that? Nudist beaches, the females and males at least get a shower before going into the pool. They all shower in the same place, no problem. They still, for whatever reason that I cannot understand, have female bathrooms and men's bathrooms. And I don't know why they don't have a single bathroom. You can have individual stalls. I can understand that, because even men, they want to do their stuff in private, no problem. Why do we have female and male bathrooms? Can we all go to the same bathroom? After all, do we need to wear clothes? Clothes were invented, as far as I'm concerned, about 35, maybe to 40,000 years ago, which is when man entered Europe. Do we need clothes? When it's a hot day, take it all off, right? Why not? I mean, if we don't need clothes, then maybe we don't need to worry about having all these rules out there, as far as bathrooms and so on. I mean, you dress up when it's cold, maybe in winter, no problem, and then you take it off in summer. Any problem with that? And let me give you, for instance, the women, especially in places like Afghanistan, they wear that veil over their face, they cover it all, and they feel nude if they were to take that little veil off. They feel nude. They feel that something is wrong, that they're not used to it. It's part of their culture, part of their brain now. Okay, so it's not only the men who have forced them maybe to use that over time, could be, but now the women, who are born in that society, they're conditioned to use that veil, and you can't get it out of their face because they believe in that. That's what they are. So think about all this. Do we need to have differences between males and females, especially in sports? Okay, moving on here. More related to the subject here. And the reason I'm raising that is, given enough time, maybe, just maybe, women will catch up if we give them enough time. Maybe it's too late. Maybe extinction will happen before equality happens. And that applies also to racism and so on. I think we're working in that direction. Will we ever reach that point where women are equal to men politically, salary wise, et cetera, et cetera? Will blacks be equal to men, especially in places like the United States? Will there be total equality? And I don't know. We may not have enough time for all that. Anyways, Mitch McConnell, a person from the GOP, Grand Old Party, he says that GOP will vote for the U.S. to default on its debt. They're going to be voting, I think in November is the cutoff date. And what are they going to vote for? Well, right now they want to raise the ceiling to $27 trillion, which is what? 99.3% of GDP. Debt is right up there with GDP. Do you think that's healthy? Are we going to continue for the next 100 or 200 or 300 years with GDP being at or below the level of debt? And I'm picking on the United States, but almost every country is there, okay? Every country, debt is climbing for all governments, reaching that plateau where it meets GDP. And so the question is, what do you think of that? Do you think this is healthy? Do you think this is normal? This is something we can handle, no problem? Or is this something new where debt is just outrageously out the door, over the hill, so to speak, completely uncontrolled? And what every government does, because really every government does it, every time they come in, they go to Congress and they say, look, we got to vote a new limit. And so all they're doing is devaluing the coin, which is what's going to, I think, take one of the trends that's going to take to the worthlessness of the dollar, of money itself. And again, the only empire that where it needs to happen is the United States. Once it happens there, we're all done. Okay, so we're taking this to the limit where at some point money will have no value because what you're receiving is debt, not assets. Okay. Anyways, that's food for thought. Just throwing it in there so that all you economists who are experts in economy can answer the question. Okay, here's another bit of news. I'm not going to read all that. Just want to mention that they've discovered, okay, apparently anonymous, the people with the faces, and they found out who's behind the Proud Boys. Found out a whole bunch of names. And the question for you is whether this is this anonymous. Is that the government? How about the Proud Boys? Are they the government? Okay. Are we having here some stuff that we don't understand, that we don't know, that is used for to as part of policy on the one hand, and also to recruit people one side or the other, or gauge the population, see which way they lean. Is this manipulation where the politicians or whoever out there, maybe it's the Illuminati, the New World Order folk, the elites, whatever you want to call them, are they behind all these groups? And do you think that, for example, the FBI? Do you think the FBI infiltrates any group that becomes important? Okay, food for thought. Okay, let's move on. Let's move on. Uh, One fellow says, will you elaborate on why urbanization leads to fewer children? Why does urbanization destroy birth rates? Another fellow asks. And he says, is it because farms need a ton of workers? And a third guy answers them, says, the cause is feminist laws. He's a Taliban, okay? He visits us from Kabul, okay? And a fourth guy here, he comes in, he says, the reason people don't have children is culture. As soon as having children and family will be glorified, people will start having children again, in cities or not. Okay? So those are some of the answers we get out there. My take, I can only give you my version of it. Okay, and here it is. Why don't we have children today? Well, the main reason is we went from the country to the city. We went from the farms to the offices. That's what it's all about. We went from agriculture first to manufacturing in the cities, and then from the cities we converted from manufacturing to services. Okay, that's what's happened. That's the transition that's happened since the 19th century. And so these are the variables that I throw at you, okay, for you to ponder. Crowdedness is one. Density-dependent birth rates, that's number one. Okay, and it's when you get into a city, it's crowded. Economy is very lean for most people. Okay, they're just barely making it to the end of the month. And then you have the houses. They're no longer like in the farms. You have all these extensions out there, and you want to bequeath the land to whom? To your sons or daughters, right? And none of that happens in the city. In the city, there's nothing to bequeath except debts, GDP, up to same level as debt. Okay, so there's nothing to bequeath. So what are you going to have a child for? You're not going to bequeath it to him, to her or him, right? You're in an apartment. Are you going to have 10 kids? Do you have enough money to maintain 10 kids, even if the apartment is, a suite, the Palace Hotel suite, No, and so these are some of the reasons, some of the problems. Economics, proletarians can barely make it to the end of the month in a service economy. Social security, retirement, in the country, a lot of people had kids, and those kids later on took care of mama and papa, okay? And today, the state takes care of the children, and the state takes care of the mama and papa, so the working people don't have to worry about those things anymore, okay? So again, no more social security that's dependent on children, on your kids. Okay, nothing to bequeath. Again, culture, freedom from shackles. I mean, the culture changes, and couples, wherever there are couples, long-lasting couples, they want to travel, they want to do stuff, and a kid just holds them down. The kid's an anchor. Okay, so this is a problem as well. No purpose for having them. In the old days, they had a purpose. Again, sometimes the kids inherited. They also took care of mom and papa. That was their social security. There was a reason to have children, aside from the type of life. These people were out there farming. And what did they do for fun? There was no radio, no TV. Okay, you figure it out, okay? Today we have other distractions, mainly games. Everybody's playing all these games, right? And because of that, there's no time for sex, reproductive sex. Sex, there's a lot, and most of it is self-serve. but what there isn't is time for sex, for real sex, for reproductive sex, the purpose Mother Nature created sex for. Okay. Okay, family structure has changed also. We were hunter gatherers. We had the clan. Everybody did it with everybody. It was free for all. You could sleep with your mother, with your daughter, whatever happened there. It was group sex. Okay, agricultural era, slavery, a lot of slaveries. Okay, people were conquered in war, taken as slaves to work the farms and inside the houses. Right, and so it was a patriarchal society where the man of the house, he had even power of life and death, not only over the slaves, but over his children and of his wife. Those were the good old days. Today it's almost the other way around. Okay, manufacturing. We went to the nuclear family, mom and pop. No more extended family. It was mom and pop and the kids. Okay, and from there we went to services. What is services? Bachelors, divorced, homosexuals. In other words, everybody lives alone. It's a single life. So we went from the many to the few. Okay, is that going to continue forever now for hundreds and hundreds of years? Always singles and just casual sex here and there for pleasure? You figure it out. Okay. So again, what I try to show is that we're at a different culture, a different economic situation today. And so, I don't know. You got to think for yourself if any of this has a bearing on extinction. Okay. And anyways, even if you know couples could reproduce, we're not reproducing. And here you see the trend. Okay, I showed this a couple times already. But by mid-century, 2050, we're going to reach what is known as ZPG, zero population growth. One person dies, one person is born, more or less, remains steady. So there's no increment in the population, the world population. In fact, it should decline even further because we're becoming older. And at some point, the older people start dying and we're not producing the young because the young are not marrying or having sex for the purposes of reproduction, reproductive sex, right? And so, yeah, I think it's going to continue all the way down, okay? And I think, in fact, Mother Nature's going to save us the agony of defeat. Going to save us the agony because he's going to cause us to die, to become extinct much sooner than that by having our economy fall to pieces. So that's going to beat this. Anyways, that's my argument. That's my theory there, okay? Okay, here's one fellow says, I remember hearing how a Chinese ruler took all the money into his tomb when he died. He also took some slaves with him, by the way. They had to die with him. He needed them for the afterlife. Okay? I think they had an economic collapse. There's been many economic collapses. We call them economic collapse when they're not really economic collapses. Not the one I'm talking about. I'm referring to something totally different. Okay? When people talk about economic collapse, they talk about maybe a recession, maybe 2 straight quarters of negative growth. Maybe they're talking about a depression, several years of negative growth or just barely breaking even. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about something else. When I use the word economic collapse, I mean one thing and one thing only, and that's that money will be no more. Trade will be no more. No one trades when money is no more, when no one accepts money. Okay? And if no one accepts money, what are you going to do? Well, people say we're going to barter. I'm going to give him my car, and he's going to give me his boat. That's the way they see it. I give you a television set, you give me a radio or whatever, a computer. That's what these people have going through their minds probably, that there's going to be a neighborly interaction where I trade goods. And the answer is no, absolutely not, because the only thing that's going to be worth of has any value after money is no more will be food. Food will be the only thing of value. And if you have food, the last thing you're going to do is trade it. You're not going to give it away for a car. You're not going to give it away for a Bitcoin or for a computer or anything. It's the only thing that's going to keep you alive for whatever time your food lasts. When the money is no more, the amount of food you've got in your cupboard or in your fridge, it's a measure of how much time you have to live. Okay? So that's my argument there. And one fellow says people will always will accept real objects like gold or food. Dummy. Well, I don't know. There are situations. Here's one situation: two fellows caught on an island. Hopefully, a little bigger than that. That's such a terrible scenario there. And one guy has a pot of gold, has a bag full of money. Do you think the other guy has any use for that money on the island? Okay, so their money has no value. And he's got a coconut. The second fellow has a coconut. Do you think he's going to trade the food for the pot of gold for the bag of money? Well, if you do, well, maybe you're the dummy. No, there are situations and situations, and no, we do not trade when money is no more. Okay, trade dies completely. Nobody trades. In fact, the first lesson you're going to learn if you're in the asphalt jungle, and you've just realized that money is no more and nobody accepts your money. The first lesson you learn is what all wild people and animals, right? Humans and the rest of the animal world, what they all know as a second nature. And that is, you don't trust anyone. You don't trust anyone. You can't go out there and trade because you're trading your life. Okay? I hope that sinks into somebody's head out there, okay? You don't trade in the asphalt jungle. Once money is no more, trade is dead. Okay? If you have food, you don't trade it. And if you have something else, nobody will trade it for you. And if you go in there and insist, you're trading your life. That's the way it works. Okay? So, no, trade dies when money dies. Okay? Fellow says, I think the same fellow, dollars are currency and not money. It's not hard to understand. Aha. Let's look at the definitions. Okay? So we know if it's hard to understand. Apparently this fellow has a tough time understanding this. Currency, medium of exchange, otherwise known as money. What is money? Medium of exchange, otherwise known as currency. Okay, money has relevance only as a medium of exchange, as currency. Otherwise, money has no value whatsoever. It's abstraction. It's in the mind, not out there. Okay, and science, we only define we only have one definition per word. Okay, so no, we do not. If currency and dollar or money are synonyms, well, then we only have one definition for them. Okay, we don't have 10 definitions for the word object. We have a single definition for the word object. We don't have 10 definitions for the word exist. Okay, there's only one definition for the word exist. Those two words are critical in physics to give a physical interpretation. Okay, another fellow says, well, it looks like Karl Marx was right. Capitalism was going to blow up. We've got what is called a mixed system today in every country in the world, beginning with North Korea all the way to the United States, from Russia all the way to Cuba, from China all the way to South America. All countries are running the same way. They have what is known as a mixed system. And the mixed system is to different degrees, okay? Some countries have a little more capitalism, and other countries have a little more socialism. But they all are, if not already, they are working towards having health care, more or less subsidized by the state. And we have schooling, which is subsidized by the state. And Social Security, your retirement, that's also done by the state. Okay, every country in the world almost has that. Maybe there's one I missed, I don't know, but I think they all have it. Okay, so every country has socialism. And every country has trade also. Even in Cuba, I mean, I've been there several times. And, there's this black market. You can't stop people from trading. And so, if especially food, in Cuba, they do trade food. And they trade food because we still have a world running with money, okay? That's why food it can be traded still, okay? But they trade food, and so what do they trade? Well, it was strange because when I went there, I bought a family a whole bunch of meat. They hadn't seen meat in months. And I went to one of these diplotiendas, as they're called. They call it diplomatic tiendas or stores. And only people with passports can go in there and buy. And so I had my passport. I went in there and I bought a bunch of meat. Bought also Coca-Cola they hadn't seen since the 1950s. And I took it to these people. And so we had a great party, etc. But all the meat, I bought too much meat and their freezers didn't work, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so they fixed the problem very easily. And you learn a lot. What they did, they went to all the neighbors, and everybody's neighborly over there, and they just gave the food away. They gave the meat away. And so I give you a pound of meat, right? And now you owe me a pound of meat whenever meat comes back to our barrio, to our store, because you can only buy at a given store in Cuba. You're registered at a given store. You can't go to this other store over here because you don't like what they have over here. First of all, they're all the same, so it wouldn't matter anyways, but you're tied to one store. And so when food comes in, like real food, like meat, then Joe says, hey, you owe me. You owe me because I gave you a kilogram or a pound of meat sometime back. And so that's the way they do it. Yeah. And it's called trade. So did Pol Pot have a right idea? Liquidate the cities. That's Mr. Pol Pot there. And no, he didn't liquidate the cities. He liquidated the critics. That's what he did. Supposedly, Pol Pot killed or caused the death of up to 3 million people in Cambodia. I didn't even know there were 3 million people in Cambodia. But he caused the death of many people. And he took all these people from the cities, like this gentleman says here, doctors and so on. And he says, you're going to the country. So he more or less evacuated the professionals from the cities. He gave them a shovel and says, go work. Go do some real work. And he got all these people out into the country, and a lot of them died of disease and different, a lot of them were shot because they refused to follow orders and so on. And so big mess. So yeah, I don't know if the solution is to evacuate the cities. I don't think you can do that anymore. Okay, I don't think there's going to be, the cities getting less dense. It's the other way around. Cities will become more and more dense until the whole thing collapses. This is my take on this. Okay, I think once the whole thing collapses, then yeah, it's like all the rats leaving the sinking ship. They're all just going to go out there into the country and look for stuff to eat. But until the collapse of money, I think the cities will just grow. Okay, what will not happen, as far as I'm concerned, is the colonization of new cities. We're not going to found new cities. Maybe one here, maybe one there, but I mean, we're not going to create new cities on the planet. Tons of them. If anything, what's going to happen is in small towns will grow a little more than they did in the past. People from the country will flock to villages first. Maybe those would turn into to towns, and from towns to cities, something like that. That's the best I can imagine there. But for new people to go out there in the middle of nowhere, in the middle of the desert, especially the young people, and say, we're going to found a city. This is like the Christopher Columbus kind of thing. You put your flag for the Queen of Spain down and you say, I claim this land for me. And you go there with hundreds of others and you found a city. Not going to happen again. The age of colonization is over. No one is going to do that anymore. Governments are not going to sponsor that, for sure. They've got bigger problems. They got debt problems, right? GDP problems. So no one's going to do that. And the only exception that I know that I can vouch to myself is that the United States creates cities or enlarges little towns by putting prisons. So they put a federal prison, right, in a little town, and suddenly all these services pop up all around it, and the city, and the little town grows into a city. And the United States has been pretty good about that. It's found a lot of cities that way by increasing the sentencing guidelines, the sentencing, the penalties. So instead of 10 years for possession of cocaine, they'll give you 25 years, really, for trafficking, right? And they'll give you 25 years. So now you stay there for a little longer, right? and so now you have more population in the system, and now you need to take care of that population. So now you created a way of enlarging the cities. Okay? And especially, in my case, I was at Eloy. And Eloy grow. If you look up Eloy, the town of Eloy, you'll see how much it grew after 1990, which is, when I was visiting Eloy, and the town grew. And you'll see the percentages, how the population grew in Eloy. It grew, why? Because of the prison. Okay? So it's a smart way of increasing, for the government, for the politicians, to use the drug trade to populate cities. Okay? So keep that in mind. Now, of course, that was immigration. In other words, people migrated from other towns in there. But you get the point. The point is that when people go to a little town, there's more chances also of young people going in there and reproducing. That's my point, okay? Okay, here's another issue. Fellow says, regarding the transition of economy, hunter-gatherer, agriculture, manufacture, service, you said that after service economy, all there will be is unemployment. Okay, I also say that service is unemployment. Services are unemployment. If you work in services, like computer programming, internet, like me, you're unemployed. Okay, let that be clear. Why are you unemployed? I'm saying you're unemployed because you're not producing anything. The service economy per se does not produce anything of value, real value. What's real value? Well, go up there with God and sit next to God, okay, and look down on the earth. Whatever's constructed, whatever you can see, whatever you could touch if you had the power of God, right? That's what exists. Concepts do not exist. Love does not exist. Intelligence does not exist. Those concepts do not exist. Exist an object that has location. What are the objects? We have boats, we have cars, we have airplanes, we have houses, we have highways. All that exists, okay? Because you can touch it? No, because it has location with respect to Jupiter. Okay? And the fields of corn, those exist as well. Cows, those exist. What doesn't exist is singing. What doesn't exist is insurance. What doesn't exist is Bitcoin. None of that exists. Okay, so anyone who's in any of those fields, he's not producing anything of value per se. He thinks he is. They call it value, okay? But no, you're not producing anything. You're living off the fat of the land. That's what we're doing today. We're all living of what people in the past built for us. And all we're doing is essentially, right, just using up that wealth, okay? That's what we're doing. We're just spreading it thinner. We're trading. I'm giving you a song, you give him a computer program, the other guy, fixes the banking, the bank, it's software, and the bank receives money from you as a deposit and then invests it. All that is worthless. Worthless, just like I'm saying, worthless. You haven't produced anything. The only time it becomes productive is when it translates into food or something tangible, such as a new road, a new house, etc. Okay. Otherwise, we have a world services is unemployment because it doesn't produce anything. And I know a lot of people say, no, it produces value. There's no such thing as value. Value is also nonsense. The only real stuff is what exists, physics. All these concepts that are floating around there, they don't exist, okay? Those are ghosts. Okay, but in the off chance that the economy managed to transition to another type of economy after the service economy, what kind of economy would it be? Hypothetically speaking, of course. Okay, so here it is. I've shown this in the past, but here for this gentleman, okay, this is the economic modes through the ages. We were hunter-gatherers for maybe 200,000 years, rounding off. 10,000 years, we were farmers, agriculturalists. First part, we were there as subsistence agriculturalists, subsistence farmers. Then we moved into trade, okay, so we became commercial farmers. Well, about 200, 300 years ago, okay, so-called industrial revolution, we started transferring people from the country to the cities. They built machinery for the country and made all country work much easier, much more efficient, and that kicked more people into the cities. And that whole process is known as the Industrial Revolution. I call it manufacturing. We went into the manufacturing age. Okay, and then from there on, what was it, about around 1980, at least the United States, Sweden, and some other countries, for the first time, services took over from manufacturing as the number one contributor to GDP and also the number one employer. Okay, more people started becoming white collar workers and leaving the blue collars behind. But again, I'm saying that's services is unemployment. But anyways, even within that, all we can do is maintain that artificially. And what we do, we create services that we don't need. And the only purpose of that is just to move money around. Again, what is money? It's an abstraction. Okay, we don't. If you're just gonna pay money for someone singing, neither you, neither the singer produced anything. All you did was give some paper or maybe just transfer a number to their account and the person sang. And so when all that's over, God looks down there and says, okay, so what did these two people produce? Unless he's got memory, he says these people haven't been doing anything for the last 8 hours. One guy just transferred a number and the other guy sang, all that was gone with the wind. Okay, so it's important to know qualitatively what our economy, how our economy is structured. Okay, someone says, intuition says babies and intelligence are not artificial creations, because I say that life, the word life, especially the words living and alive, I define them. And what I'm saying is that something that is alive has to be an object that is natural. It cannot be artificial. It can't be something we made. Okay, it's got to be something that Mother Nature made. Okay, that's my argument. Okay, right now I'm just going to put it as a rule, as a law, but you're welcome to disagree and have a different version. Okay, and this is what this person is insinuating here. Yeah, they are man-made objects. We make kids, right? Which makes them artificial. We made the kid. Hey, hooray, we have another son, another gal. China, they would bury her and wait for the guy to come around. So man can or can't make artificial intelligence? Aha. Okay, so let's answer this gentleman. And here's the answer. It's what we make with our hands that is artificial, not what we make with our wombs. Okay? And, there are some examples. Mother Nature makes babies. A lot of women say, God send her a baby, okay? And we make them through wombs, and we make poop through our butts, right? And we didn't invent or create babies or poop, okay? We haven't created life like with our hands out here. When you create a baby out here, then it's artificial. But when you make it through your inside, are we going to say that rabbits also make babies and so they make artificial things? Okay, so we got to keep this in the right context, right? It's okay to play devil's advocate, but make sure you come back with your feet back to earth, okay? We didn't create babies or poop. It took Mother Nature thousands of years of patience to make intelligence, okay? our level of intelligence. Intelligence, I have defined that in the past. Okay, and I'm not going to get into that now. But intelligence essentially is the cell. The cell is the first intelligent thing. It's almost synonymous with life. Okay, but man thinks he's more intelligent than Mama. Okay? And wants to do it in decades. It took Mother Nature thousands of years. We think we can do it in a few seconds of the universal clock. Okay, and no, it takes a little longer than a few decades to create life, and that's why, and that's a good argument against the existence of God as well. You know, for those of you who propose God as a hypothesis, okay, we cannot say that intelligence, if that's what you're going to say God is, created intelligence. First of all, because he already had intelligence, right? So what created that intelligence? That's the first issue. But then he couldn't have created intelligence. At least we have no proof, no evidence. Okay, for those of you who like evidence and proof, like to be convinced, um, you know, we have no proof that intelligence, like us, top of the line, can create intelligence. We can't create intelligence. Why do we think that there's another intelligence up there that created intelligence down here? Meaning us, I guess, right? So, we have no evidence that intelligence can create intelligence, if we're going to talk in those terms. Okay, another fellow says, or in fact, several people here. The virus, I took just a couple because there's a lot of these. The virus does not exist, says. For one reason, we all have an immune system that has known the virus for millions of years, regardless of whether it is a new variant. The immune system remembers its origin and can compare all variants with the origin and fight them off. Another person says, gotta be dumb to get a vaccine for a virus which doesn't exist. What a joke. Okay, I did clarify. I didn't get a virus, the vaccine. I got my second shot, by the way. Still hurts a little bit. Yeah, almost nothing. A couple days ago. Okay, so got the second shot. I guess I'm covered. Did I do it because I was scared that I was going to get the virus? Absolutely not. I got the vaccine only because I'm going to travel and I don't want the hassle. Believe me, I don't care about the vaccine one way or the other. But then the question is, does the virus exist? Do we need to get shots against this vaccine? Maybe it doesn't exist. Maybe they're just giving us a shot for something that's not out there. And all I can do is share with you my COVID flow chart. Okay, so here goes the flow chart, which hopefully gets you to think a little bit in the right direction at least. It just helps, okay, in your reasoning. Okay, so here it goes. Okay, here's the COVID flow chart, and it starts like this. We're trying to answer whether the COVID is real or not. Okay, that's the purpose of the flow chart. And if you're on the ultra right, ultra left, no need apply. Okay, we're just going to use people who are open-minded. Okay, here. Okay, people who can think out of the box. Okay, and so first question for you is, would Cuba, Iran, and other enemies of the American empire, right, supposedly one of the ones who is in on the secret, on the conspiracy, on the hoax, right, would they cooperate with the U.S. in this hoax? You know, and I can't get an answer to that question from anyone. Okay, and until I get an answer to that question, you got to pass that step. Okay, otherwise, you know, you haven't said anything. Okay, and if you say yes, okay, that these countries would all agree, the leaders of these countries who are enemies of each other, that they would put their weapons aside, all their quarrels aside, and say, okay, for this, yeah, we're all going to agree. We're going to invent this inexistent virus. We're going to tell each one, within our countries, we're going to tell our populations that there's this ravaging disease out there, and we got to do something about it. Well, if you think that happens in the real world, we have to take your voting rights away from you. You don't have enough mental capacity to vote, to understand what politics is about. Okay, that's my take on that one. And let's continue with the flow chart here. If you answered no, then you're a little closer to rationality. And here's what continues. Are there people so mean and greedy that they would have created the bug to take over the world? Well, I mean, there are people who are greedy and mean out there, and if you answered, no, well, I've got a building I can sell you. I think you're quite naive. Okay. But if you answered no, well, we continue and said, could it be that someone created the bug knowing, right, that there is no solution to the impending economic collapse? Okay, so they create this bug as a diversion, tactic. Okay, and so they say, look, we can't fix the problem. Look, it's all going downhill. All we can do is create more money, and at some point we're going to have a crisis that we can't solve, which is creating more money. And so what do? Well, why don't we create the bug? We create the bug, and we tell people, look, we got this problem. Everybody's got to lock down. We got to wear masks. If you're going to travel, you got to get the vaccine. The whole works, right? Yeah, that's possible. We have to consider it within the laws of probability and possibility. Okay, that's the first one. And then, well, would China be complicit in this hoax? Okay, in light of the fact that China intends to be the next empire. Okay, do you think China, again, would cooperate with the United States, Russia, Iran, Cuba, North Korea, the whole works? Do you think that would happen? Would all these countries agree that, we have a big problem with our global economics and we just got to fool people for a few more years, either to take over the world and keep our privileges or just stretch it as long as we can? Do you think they're there? Do you think the powers that be in China and Russia and the United States, especially those three countries, do you think they already know that the world is coming to an end? I don't think so. I haven't seen the theory anywhere. My theory that there's going to be an economic collapse. What I see out there is something which is misleading, and people confuse with my theory. And I keep getting a lot of people who send me letters telling me about it, but I know it by heart, and they're missing the point. These people, the folks out there, think it's a question of resources. They think it's a question that we have too much population on Earth. We have 8 billion people on Earth, and we don't have enough resources, metals, food, etc., to feed them to keep the world running. That's what they think. They think it's an issue of resources, and whenever there's such an analysis, the first thing they do is introduce irrelevant stuff altogether. Climate change. Oh, look, climate change. We're displacing all the wild animals. Look, all the animals are dying all around us. We're in the sixth mass extinction. So they bring stuff that has nothing to do with the subject matter at all. It's like a jack of all trades, cover all bases. So they say, so every time they have the theory, they cover all the bases. See, oh, look, climate change. Oh, we have the sixth mass extinction. Look, all the animals that are dying, all the plants that are dying, all the species of plants that are dying. We got to do something. Peak oil, they have all these arguments, and then they throw on top of that the fact that, the population on Earth is, we're beyond help because we have too much population in the world already. There are not enough resources to keep such an increasing population, going steady. And so this is the issue. They throw everything in there and they haven't hit it on the nose. It has nothing to do, this whole thing has nothing to do with resources. It has to do with our economic system. You can't keep borrowing money forever, creating money to pay debt, and creating jobs that don't exist, services. That's the problem. You can't keep creating concepts, which is what services does, okay? It's all here in the mind. It's all abstract. You can't create concepts and creating jobs for people saying, oh, I created a job, and what you created was a concept. You said, okay, you're a singer now. Okay, that's my job. I sing. And so the person sings, he gets a salary, and with that he buys food. Okay, and what we're doing is simply feeding money into the system and not producing anything real, which are the tangible things out there. Okay, the things we can see and touch. Those who say that exist and see and touch, this is the moment where you have to apply that see and touch. Okay, so yeah, it's those things that have shape and that have location. Those are the things we're interested in as far as when we talk about wealth. Right now, we're not creating wealth, at least not fast enough. What we're doing is living off the fat of the land. We're living off what our forefathers made for us. Okay, now the fellow says all the countries don't have to agree for it to be a conspiracy. Oh my God. It can only be a few set in motion by one. Oh, can it? The response would be, and is uniform. No, these are just statements. He hasn't shown that that's the case. Okay, it is very easy to imagine a bunch of rich bastards sitting around a table to come up with a plan for domination. They do it all the time. Yeah, that second statement doesn't prove the first one, or doesn't support the first one. Okay, and yeah, they can sit around and conspire and create hoaxes and false flags, all that stuff. No problem. That doesn't mean that first statement, all countries don't have to agree. Okay, my thing for the so-called vax is it's a new technology with no track history, and what is in it, we have a right to wait. Yeah, I mean, I don't disagree. In fact, I didn't get a vaccine for over a year, and the reason I didn't get my vaccine, first, I don't care about it. Second, I'm not in contact with so many people out there, and so again, and like I mentioned in the past, there's a difference between the person who has to work and works with a lot of people, especially in crowded places. That person has a different situation than the guy who's unemployed or on welfare or Social Security, retirement, like in my case. And those are different situations. And so I don't have to worry because I think statistically the chances of me catching that virus are slim. That's the way I look at it. Okay. Is there a virus out there? I think there is because, again, I don't think all these enemies would agree on a hoax. Okay, that's the main one. Unless you can answer that question, you don't have a foot to stand on. Okay, but once we can see the virus, am I worried about it? No, I'm not worried because, again, the chances of me catching that virus are slim. Even if I catch it, maybe I have automatic, natural defenses, and if not, well, I die. In my case, I'm 69, going on 69 this year. So, I don't have too much to live anyways. And so if I die a little earlier, all that happened was I drank less beer. That's it. So my situation is different than yours. If you're 20 years old and you work with a lot of people, well, you might be a little more worried than me. Okay? And again, the only reason I got my shot is not because I vouch for the people up there who gave the orders. Nothing like that at all. It's just because, these people are hassling everyone who travels in. So, I don't want the hassle. That's it. Okay, and final issue, fella says, definition of life. Again, Bill, who laughs at irrational biologists for thinking menopausal women who stop reproducing are no longer alive. Well, no. Yes and no. In a way, yeah. And I'm saying that the problem here is that the establishment, biologists, they have to this day no definition of the word life. In other words, they don't know what a thing that is alive is or means. You know what that word means? They can't define the word alive. They don't know what a living thing entity is. And biology is what? The study of living entities. And so if you don't know what a living entity is, what kind of biologist are you? And so they have created all these properties, I guess you could say, or attributes. It's a person who can reproduce, grow, blah, blah, breathe, etc. And none of those apply to all living entities. That's the problem. And so they don't have a definition. They have all these things that, well, you know what I mean. No, I don't. Because you got the wrong definition. So I have a definition, but this person doesn't like it, or he complains about it, or plays devil's advocate on it. Okay, no problem. But doesn't look at himself in the mirror when his organisms stop living, when they stop flying, jumping, climbing ladders against gravity, and go to sleep. Uh, so let's put the definition of life of the establishment here so we can compare side by side. Okay. And it goes like this, says life, the condition that distinguishes animals and plants from inorganic matter. Yeah, okay, and what is that? Including capacity for growth, reproduction, functionality, activity, la 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 la. Okay, so they just mention a bunch of properties that not all animals have, but they say this is the best definition we've got. And Wikipedia, same thing. Life is a characteristic that distinguishes physical entities. Okay, at least they don't think of pixels, that have biological processes such as signaling and self-sustaining processes. And they go from the same thing. They essentially list. It's a list of properties. Okay. What do we put in exchange to this? Well, we say that alive, living, a natural object that moves against the path of least resistance. Essentially, a living being has the ability to move against gravity, something a rock does not. Okay, and life is a group of living beings. Okay, so those are the definitions. And yeah, this fellow doesn't like that definition, but he says that I'm saying that, for example, if my aunt, she never had babies. In fact, she didn't. She was not able to have children. Was she alive? And is my grandmother alive after the age of 60 and when she can have no more babies? Okay, so obviously having children is not a criterion that should be used to define the word living. And so this is what this fellow is making fun of. But I'm saying the first entity that we can call living, alive, is the cell. Okay? The cell is the first living entity. DNA is not alive. Virus is not alive. Virus and DNA, RNA, and all these others, they are molecules. That's all they are. They're just molecules. Do they have the ability to move by themselves? The answer is no. Okay? They can't move against gravity specifically, but they can't move by themselves. What happens is when they're in a body, when they're in a cell, they all these that's where they go to work. They start moving. They start creating copies of themselves. Okay, and at least that's the theory. Okay, and so that's when viruses and molecules move chemically and otherwise. Okay, electromagnetic motion. Van der Waals forces, etc. So that's when they start moving. The cell is the first entity that moves on its own. And so it doesn't matter if you're sleeping or not, your cells are moving, okay, inside your body. Not so the rocks. Now, you can take it as far as you want. You can say, well, do atoms move inside rocks? Or are they so rigid that they don't move? And yeah, the answer is atoms, expand and contract. Okay, so is an atom alive? And yeah, you can take it as far as you want. We have to use a word life in order to have biology, the study of life. Okay, explanations in the living world. And so we have to have a definition for that. And the definition, again, is that which can move against gravity. That's the only difference between a living entity and a rock. Okay. Now, why do I exclude artificial things? Airplanes fly, balloons float, etc., and they move against gravity as well. Yeah, because if you want to include it, again, I say no problem. Go ahead and include it, but you better have some use for it, for that definition. This is not a question of defining for the sake of defining. It's a question of defining so that we can use the definition for some purpose in science. And so we distinguish artificial things from living things because we're used to the word living referring to what Mother Nature made. That's why I exclude all artificial entities. Okay? Now, you want to include it in there, no problem, but make sure you have a reason to do so. Okay? And that's where I think this person's going to fail. And everybody who just wants to play devil's advocate and says, let's include artificial things because they move against gravity as well. No, you can't do that because we have no use for that definition. Okay, with that, we move on to physics, physics proper. Okay, and I've been looking at transparency and opacity and reflection, refraction as subgroups of those. Okay, and let's do a little recap here, real quick. And this is what I've covered. I'm saying there's at least 4 mechanisms or variables you should consider when looking at opacity and transparency. How does Mother Nature do this magic trick? Where here something is opaque and over here something is transparent. Okay, you got to figure out how Mother Nature does that magic trick. Okay, why can I see through a window and I can't see through a wall? Okay, something's different about those. Okay, and so I mentioned already these mechanisms or variables that you should consider. Alignment is one. Okay, and, covered that, meaning that if you have polarization, okay, the two polarizers are parallel, you can see right through them. You know, if someone shines a laser through those two polarizers, you will be able to see the laser. The light goes through and reaches your eye or whatever. On the other hand, if you turn it 90 degrees, one of the polarizers with respect to the other, the beam is extinguished and you don't see the beam anymore. Okay, so apparently Mother Nature does transparency and opacity by just rearranging the direction of the molecules. In other words, the direction in which they point to tilt, okay, orientation, that has something to do with opacity. That's one of the ways Mother Nature does, you know, opacity and transparency. And I call it alignment. Okay? Next one, quantity. You know, you showed one sheet. In fact, I think, I don't have it here. Anyways, you have one sheet of something that's transparent. You put a whole bunch of sheets, like glass. You put many sheets of glass, thin glass, the same glass that you can see through in your house. You put many of those, it becomes greenish. And at some point, it becomes opaque. So here, something that was transparent only because of its thinness becomes completely opaque. Did I say something is transparent when it's very thin? It becomes opaque when you put many of those. Okay, so again, quantity is another way, another variable you should consider. I mentioned temperature, the fact that, you know, like air, you know, if you freeze it, well, suddenly you can see air. Okay, but when it's very hot, meaning in a gaseous state, you can't see the air. Okay, and so temperature has something to do with it. Okay, but keep in mind, there's the other side of the coin to that, and that's that, you know, if you take argon, it's more or less transparent when it's solid or liquid, but when it's in a gaseous state, you know, it's a violet, purplish color. So it's no longer transparent. Now it's become opaque. Okay, so keep that in mind. Okay, but again, temperature seems to have something to do with it. That's my point. And then I talked about rigidness, stiffness of material, molecular structure. You know, usually we associate opacity with stuff which is rigid, like walls, okay, like cement walls, bricks, steel beams. And anything that is tending towards liquid and gas is usually, or we associate those with things that are transparent. Okay? So apparently the molecular structure, which is also a function of temperature, has something to do with it. Okay? But I have concluded quantum mechanics provides no physical interpretation for transparency or opacity. Okay? And again, what I'm trying to do here is I'm trying to give you tools so that you can figure it out on your own. Okay? I want you to think, because otherwise I don't know if you learned anything. If I tell you all the answers, you say, oh, okay, and you just memorized it for the test, and then, you know, you don't really understand it. The way you're going to understand it, you got to figure it out for yourself once you have the tools. And so don't ask what Bill can do for you. Ask what you can do for Bill. Don't ask. Tell me. Tell me why air and water are transparent and why a brick is not. Okay, so that's the purpose of these last few lectures. Okay, and so why hasn't quantum mechanics provided a physical interpretation for transparency or opacity? And people say, but they have, Bill. You're just out of time. You haven't heard it. You come back. You got to come in from the 19th century. Okay, here it is. We had this fella, Nick Lucid. He's has his own channel there, and he summarizes essentially what the establishment believes. It says, when a photon comes along, the electron gets excited and jumps to a higher energy level. Okay, that's the bottom line. Okay, what quantum mechanics says, the way they explain this is that a photon hits an electron bead that is circling the nucleus of the atom, and it bumps it off into a higher energy level. Okay, that's the idea. Okay, it either does or it doesn't. It depends on how much energy that photon has. And he continues, says, an electron in a gas molecule releases a photon. Okay, an electron in a liquid or solid molecule, the other molecules are too close, and the electron calms down by releasing that energy to adjacent molecules, increases the thermal energy instead of releasing a photon. In other words, that photon energy, which I guess they're synonyms, is transferred to molecules next, the neighboring molecules, and so they vibrate, they absorb that heat, that energy, or they essentially release it as heat. Okay, a photon that does not excite an electron lacks what? A high enough energy to boost it to a higher level, band, or orbital. Is still absorbed by the electron, but immediately rejected. So the electron absorbs it, but rejects it. In other words, spits it back out and does not jump to a higher energy level. That's what he's saying. Okay, and this is standard quantum mechanics here. Okay, the energy gap in glass is too big for visible light. Okay, to excite an electron, the photon has to have an energy of at least 138 nanometers, and that's UV light, meaning it's outside the visible range. Okay, if visible light cannot excite an electron, it won't get absorbed as thermal energy. It still gets absorbed just as vibrations in the electron instead. Okay, and since the electrons reject these photons, they make it out the other side. And he exclaims triumphantly, transparency. Okay? In other words, if just to summarize, a photon comes in, it gets absorbed by the electron. If it absorbs it, it has a couple of possibilities. One is releasing it as heat to the neighbors, and the other one is releasing it, jumping to a higher energy level. Okay, and the other one is it absorbs it, but the energy of the photon is not high enough, so it's not strong enough, you could say, or whatever, and it doesn't hit that electron to the higher energy level. In which case, the photon either passes by, doesn't get absorbed by the electron, or gets absorbed by the electron and spit out back again. Okay, so different people explain it different ways. Those are the options. Okay, you have to understand that in order to understand all my criticisms here, because a lot of people are off on the wild blue yonder, talking about nonsense, and they don't answer that issue. They don't seem to understand that that's what quantum says. Okay, so what does quantum say? Photon is absorbed and released. If it released or doesn't absorb it at all, then the photon continues, and that's why an object is transparent. A body, a substance is transparent. Okay, so I hope we got that. Okay, and why is that nonsense? Well, first of all, quantum doesn't have particles. What you're seeing there are really corpuscles because you see something there. That's not the corpuscle or the particle of quantum mechanics. Quantum mechanics has a zero-dimensional point particle, as they call it. They use the word particle when they don't mean particle. The word particle is misleading. It's there to confuse people. The word particle of quantum is not an object, it's a concept. Okay? And it means wave function collapse, because they're not interested in the architecture or the structure of the entity known as a photon or an electron. They just want to be able to know where to locate it. Okay? So they're not interested in structure at all. No mathematician on Earth ever was concerned about that. Well, maybe I can't say ever, but certainly since the last 100 years, they have not been interested in architecture at all. They don't care about architecture. They don't care about structure. They don't use objects in quantum mechanics. They just use mathematical concepts, abstractions. So that's the first problem. And the second one is that they use this transverse wave, which what is waving? And what they're insinuating, is that it's particles. So we're back to particles. What are the particles? Zero-dimensional point nothings. Okay, that's what they are. But actually, the transverse wave invented by essentially Mr. Maxwell, James Maxwell, just a bunch of vectors. It's a mathematical concept. It has nothing to do with physics. The wave of quantum mechanics, or classical mechanics, you could say, is just a bunch of vectors. That's what those blue and red arrows are, just magnitude and direction. And what they have is magnitude and direction, which is moving sideways. Very scary stuff. So quantum mechanics does not, or mathematical physics in general, right, doesn't have a physical object to do physical interpretations. So their stuff has nothing to do with physics. Okay, physics is what? Physical interpretations, explanations, rational explanations, right, of physical phenomena. And that's not what they do. What they do is describe. What they have is mathematical physics in general. In fact, all of it it's just descriptions. What is an equation? A description. It's a description of motion, of how something behaves. So they can't tell you what gravity is. They cannot tell you what is mediating gravity in that invisible, intangible world we call gravity. What they can do is tell you how fast an object that they can see and touch falls to the ground. That they can tell you because they can measure, they give you the equation, and that's all they provide. They say that's gravity. But we don't know what gravity is because in order to know, to understand, to explain what gravity is, give a physical interpretation, you need a physical object. You need to make the invisible object that Mother Nature uses, you have to make it visible. Okay? So you have to draw what you think Mother Nature is using. You have to make what? An assumption of what Mother Nature could be using to mediate gravity, light, magnetism, the whole works. Okay, and that's what no one in mathematical physics does. That's why the physics part of that title, mathematical physics, is excess baggage. It's just mathematics. That's all it is, what they do. Okay, and so here we have, look at this trickery. One guy objects to my one-way mirror. They call it two-way mirror. I don't agree with that term because you can only see one way. That's what a one-way mirror is. Why they call it two-way mirror? Wrong. It's not two-way. One way is mirror, the other way it's glass. You can see in one direction, you can't in the other. That's what it's all about. So I call it a one-way mirror. Okay? That is a mirror on two sides, and yet you can see through it in both directions. Yeah, see, none of these people answer the question. Here's the issue. Okay, this is what people have to figure out. Okay, let me put it over here. Okay. The man sees a man. He sees himself in the mirror. The woman, she's looking through the same glass from the other side, and she sees the man. She doesn't see herself. Okay, so she sees a man, he sees a man. He sees himself, she sees him. Meaning, the light from him went to her eye. The light from her did not go to his eye. Okay, do we have that? That's what a one-way mirror is. Now, what's the issue? The issue is we have, because some people say, well, it's the coating that it's on one side. And the other people say, well, what you have here is it's the lighting in the room. Here it's dark, over here it's light. Irrelevant, irrelevant, irrelevant. Okay? It's irrelevant because it's irrelevant to the question that quantum mechanics answers. Quantum mechanics says, what? Photon comes in, if the electron does not absorb it, it sends it out or it never picks it up in the first place. And so the photon goes through as if it found nothing, between the thing in your eye. Okay, that's what quantum mechanics says. Here we have a mirror. That's the only thing standing between the gal and the guy. Okay? We shine a laser from one side, the girl sees it. We shine a laser from the other side, the man does not see it. In fact, when he points his laser to the mirror, he gets a reflection in the mirror. He doesn't see the girl. Okay? So now the laser is the same one. It has nothing to do with a room. It has nothing to do with a coating. It has to do with, here we're talking about just the laser light, the beam, the photons that make up the laser. Just the laser, the red beam, 620 nanometers, whatever, okay? So we're only talking about the photons that make up the laser beam. They have to go through the same thickness of material, which is that glass/mirror, okay? Whether it goes in one direction or in the other direction, it's the same amount of material, same atoms, same molecules in between, the two lasers. Okay, so the photons of the lasers from one side and the other have to go through the same amount of material. Why doesn't the electron of any atom pick up the laser in one direction and does so in the other direction? Okay, all we have is a difference in direction. The beam is the same. The photons are the same. They have to traverse the same amount of material. They're picked up in one direction. They're not picked up in the other direction. And it's the same material in between the two lasers. That's the question you have to answer. And that destroys the answer that quantum mechanics gives. Quantum mechanics says that's what we're attacking with this. We're saying that quantum has the wrong explanation. It's not a question of absorbing photons because the photons would be absorbed in either direction. Okay, I hope that went through somebody's head out there. Okay, so is that clear? Okay, let me move on here. Okay, fellow says, also attacks this, says there are two factors determining speed of sound, density and rigidity. The denser a medium is, the slower sound travels, but the stiffer, the faster. Okay, so he's more or less regurgitating what I said last time. Okay, obviously water and iron are much denser than air, but they are also much stiffer, so sound is faster instead of slower. Okay, helium and hydrogen are lighter than air, but the speed of sound is faster in them too. Okay, so he's just putting out a lot of facts. Okay, opacity and reflectivity, I guess he meant, are probably in large part a function of the change in stiffness across a boundary. The rope twists backwards instead of torquing, and especially stiff atom. Okay, the good thing is that at least I got the guy to think. Okay, and I wish more people would do that like he did. In other words, he's trying to analyze it. He said, I'm giving him the tools. He's going out there trying to figure out, okay, why is this transparent? Why is that opaque? And why do we have some contradictions in the sense that some stiff things are transparent, some gaseous, maybe liquid things are not? And so it's not only stiffness, there's some other factors working in there. Okay, so again, I'm giving you the tools. You got to put them together. You got to put the puzzle together to figure out why air, glass, water are transparent and why a brick is not. Okay, so here's what he was referring to, the fact that, you have sound going through something which is solid like steel, through liquids such as water, and through a gas such as air. And you can see that sound travels faster through the solid than through the liquid, and liquid faster than through gas. Okay, and so the question is this a good analogy for how light behaves? Can we extrapolate that verbatim or the mechanism to light? And I'm saying no, you cannot. Okay, that was my argument. My argument was you cannot. Why? Because in the case of sound, it has to do with molecules. Okay, you don't have sound out there in space. Even if the astronauts could take off their little hat, and they could shout at each other, assuming they could breathe or whatever, they wouldn't be able to hear because you need vibrations of the molecules to carry that sound. Okay, that's not the case with light, but it should be. It should be because you say, well, there's no atoms, and obviously light does not require vibrations of atoms. That means light is not the vibration of atoms. But then they have this ether, which is what everybody used in the last 400 years. They said there's ether out there, something tiny. What are they referring to? A bunch of particles. And quantum has now proved it to themselves, and the mathematicians, they say, look, the vacuum is made of particles. You have particles popping in from the void, positive and negative. And when they recombine, they annihilate, meaning they turn into a space particle, because that's where the next particle is going to come out, separate, and become these two particles. So they're talking about particles, and they're saying there's this invisible particle world out there. We'll call it an ether because that's the word that's always been used, which means a bunch of particles. And so if space itself is made of a bunch of particles, and that's what's vibrating when you talk about a wave, then we're talking about the vibrating of, or vibration of, all these gazillions of particles. And that's what light would be under the quantum mechanics, or mathematical physics in general. So again, is space made out of particles? And if it is, then we have a problem, because we're saying that light is the vibration of those particles. Okay, and is that what quantum wants to accept? Is that what they're going to vouch for? Again, that's the question they never answer. They leave it out there, and they talk about waves, but they don't tell you what it is that's waving. But what they're insinuating is that what's waving are particles. And what are those particles? Well, space is made out of particles. But they're not very clear on that. No one out there has really grasped that very well. The general public, I mean. But that's what they're insinuating. Okay? So keep that in mind. This is what they have going through their minds. Okay, and another fellow made a comment also, and he said, to me, the theory that gravity and atomic molecular alignment have a lot to do with transparency as torsion waves get relayed along the road from atom to atom makes a lot of sense, okay? In the case of water, my guess would be that the effect is enhanced because both gravity and the shape of the water molecule, a V shape, remember the water molecule is kind of like that, and you got the oxygen and two hydrogens, okay? Result in a stacking of the molecules, whereby creating a sort of lattice. Okay? This take, again, people who are reasoning, trying to figure out why materials are transparent. Now the H atoms are aligned and there's lower interference in the relaying. I would expect that even under motion, water would, for the most part, retain this configuration and any disruptions would not last sufficiently long to disrupt transparency. Another molecule that has this V shape is SiO2, glass, right? Coincidence? Well, let me correct them on that second issue. Okay, no, SiO2, according to this fellow out here, is a linear molecule, okay? Electron geometry of SiO2 is linear because no lone pair of electrons is present on the silicon. Okay, this is what he says. Okay, and you can see that there's a difference with the H2O, which is 104 degrees. Okay, so one is, you could say triangular, the other one's linear. Okay, that's the first issue. But the second issue is the fact that this fellow at least tries to break his brain trying to figure out, how to explain transparency. And that's good. All I can do is give you the tools and say, look, these are the things you got to watch out for. Under the rope model, you can apply it now to transparency and opacity and find out exactly how Mother Nature does this magic trick. Okay? Now, should I tell you? If I tell you, will you believe me first? Then the issue is, have you learned or have you just memorized? It's nice for you to figure out how the magician did the trick on stage and not go to the locker room and say, how did you do that trick? No, try to figure it out. If you can't figure it out, spend 10 years figuring it out. Okay, then you're thinking. Otherwise, if the guy said, "Well, this is how I did it," oh, okay, that's so easy. Yeah, and maybe you didn't understand it. Okay, so what was this fellow talking about? Well, he's talking about this. Here I have my son who turned water on its side, and the question is, what did he do? Did the molecules of water move like the one on the top or the one on the bottom? Did the molecules rotate or did they maintain their fixed position with respect to the center of the earth due to gravity? Okay, so that's the question for you to ponder. Okay, and that's what this fellow was analyzing. Okay, but today we're going to go with a fifth mechanism or variable that you should consider, another factor. Okay, and here it is. This is it's got to do with frequency. Okay, it's known as Wien's displacement law. Some call it Wien. The lower the temperature, the longer the wavelength. Another way of stating that, wavelengths are inversely proportional to temperature. We talked about temperature, okay, and also the rigidity of the material. The colder it is, the stiffer it is. Okay? Temperature, another way of stating Wien's law, temperature directly proportional to frequency. Okay, that's the one we're looking at down at the bottom. You can see that temperature, there's the thermometer at the bottom, way at the bottom, is in direct proportion to frequency. The higher the frequency, the higher the temperature. Okay, so this is the notion we have out there. What's the problem? The problem is we see a little snake there, a little squiggly line. We don't know what that is. What is that? Well, they say that's a wave. And one issue is wave of what? And what is that illustration of? Is that a string? Is that what they're showing there? A string that's, folded several times? No, they just put that in there, but there's no physical object in quantum that looks like that. What they talk about is particles. And particles ain't particles. They're not corpuscles. What they are is point particles, meaning wave function collapses or vibrating fields or whatever they want to call it. Okay? In other words, there is no such thing as a wave. And that's the big problem. And here's another vision of this spectrum. Okay? And you can see it there. The visible part is a very small part of the entire spectrum. When you get to the high end, gamma rays there, high vibrations apparently, and radio waves are on the other extreme. And again, we see that squiggly snake there. What is that squiggly snake? What is a wave? So there is no physical object called wave, first of all, and then you won't see it in the standard model of quantum mechanics. What you'll see is what they call particles, and those particles ain't particles. So we got problems all around with the physical interpretations of quantum mechanics. No wonder Richard Feynman says no one understands quantum mechanics. Yeah, no kidding. Because you haven't set the foundations for your theory. You haven't identified the objects that Mother Nature uses. Why? Because you can't see or touch them. So no experiment, no equation is going to elucidate what that invisible, intangible world out there looks like. The only way is to drink a couple beers, sit back, and think. Try to visualize what Mother Nature could be doing in that invisible, intangible world of hers. Okay, so here we have what the so-called wave of mathematics is. Okay, and you can see it's not a physical object. They call it the electromagnetic wave. Came from Mr. Maxwell. Actually, they had the transverse wave already came by Augustin Fresnel, okay, French guy. He came up with a transverse notion, and they were putting it together between him and James Maxwell, going through Faraday in between. But this is what they came up with. And what are we staring at? Well, we're staring at a bunch of arrows. Those blue and red arrows. What are those? Engine arrows? And no, those arrows represent vectors. In other words, they put something physical that you could see, but what it represents is an abstraction. It represents a vector. And what is a vector? Well, it's magnitude and direction. That's what it is. So you're talking about something mathematical that has nothing to do with the physical world. Okay, and what is a field? Well, it's a bunch of moving vectors. That's what a field is. So a magnetic field and an electric field are just moving vectors. Moving what? Magnitudes and directions. And forget about directions, just magnitudes. And then what is a wave? Well, a wave is just made of two fields. And what are the fields doing? They're waving. Are they waving up and down like when you move a string, like a standing wave? No, they're moving who knows how. Because they just say they move. They just represent this mathematically. Okay? And so that's what the wave is, the electromagnetic wave. They say that's what light is. That's the physical representation of light, electromagnetic wave. And so far we have nothing in front of us. All we have is a mathematical calculation of vectors and motion. That's all we have. Okay? Okay, so let's compare it against the rope so that we know what the differences are. The one on the top is what mathematical physics proposes. Again, a bunch of fields. What are those? Abstract mathematical concepts, just traveling vectors. Rope proposes a physical object. We're saying there's a rope there that you can't see or touch. Okay? And yeah, if you want to see or touch it, just ask the people in quantum and they'll tell you that you can't see or touch light. You can't see or touch gravity, the mediator of gravity. Or you can't see or touch with your hand, right? Or with your eyes, right? Magnetism, whatever is doing magnetism. So that means there's no physical object in that region. There's nothing mediating light. There's nothing mediating magnetism. There's nothing, absolutely nothing mediating gravity. Well, if you think like that, then you're essentially introducing black magic into your theory, into your explanation. And so, no, we introduce a physical object that's a 3D rope-like entity. It looks more or less like DNA, like a rope. Any way you want to visualize it, that's what we're proposing. That's the assumption that that's what mediates light. And so now we can talk about frequency. Okay, which is another way Mother Nature does transparency and opacity. So what is it? Okay, well, we start by saying that we do have an equation. It's a wave equation. C, velocity of light, 300,000 kilometers per second. Okay, C equals frequency times wavelength. When frequency goes up, wavelength goes down. When wavelength goes up, frequency goes down. They're inversely proportional. The only entity imaginable that can represent that equation is a rope-like entity. Looks more or less like this, okay? Okay? And the more you torque it, the shorter the links, and the more links you have. More links, frequency. Shorter links. The longer the links, okay? The longer links, the fewer links you have. Frequency has gone down, wavelength has gone up. That's what we're showing there with a 4, 8, and 16. And like we just said a minute ago, the spectrum, right? Low frequency is identified with cold, with the infrared region of the spectrum, okay? And what we're talking about is longer wavelengths and shorter or smaller frequency, shorter frequency. In other words, you have more links per length, per rope length, okay? And as you go up higher, you torque the rope more and more and more and more and more. Well, at some point you get into the ultraviolet range, which is on the other side of on the upper side of the visible spectrum, okay? High frequency is related to hot. So cold, low frequency, rigidity. High frequency, hot, typically gases, water and gas. If you freeze water, you get it colder, okay? What happens? It gets solid. And what do we do? What we did was change the lengths of the ropes, okay? The number of links and the length. Okay, so that's the overall proposal. That's the theory, okay? And so yeah, so here we have it. An example of air versus a wall. A wall uh, absorbs that light, that the rope ends in an atom that forms the wall. But that atom is in a rigid structure, which is the wall. Why is the wall rigid? Well, because it's cold. Okay? If we heat up the wall, like throw it inside the sun, it evaporates. It turns into gas. Whatever molecules, whatever atoms the wall is made out of, go whoop, they lose that rigid structure. Okay? So the wall is only solid when it's cold, which is its normal state here on Earth. So we look at a wall and we just take it for granted. Oh, okay, there's the wall. Those atoms that form that wall, they're cold. Okay? For room temperature, for them it's cold, very cold. You want to evaporate them, you want them to move around, maybe turn into liquids and gases, well, then you got to heat it up. And throwing inside the sun will guarantee that that wall will turn into some kind of gas, for sure. Okay, so what happens? While it's still solid, while it's still cold, meaning what? Low frequency, longer links, okay? So what happens? You have light coming in to an atom, and it doesn't relay, because that's the explanation for transparency, right? Under the rope model, relaying from one atom to another. But what happens? Because it's in a rigid structure, it absorbs that impact, okay? And so what comes out is a longer length link. Light does go through the wall, in a sense. In other words, what it is being relayed through the wall, but you can't see it because the rigidness of the wall, because it's cold, because it doesn't like that frequency, okay? What it does is absorb the impact of that torsion, and when it relays it at a longer length, okay? And so it's beyond the visible range on the other side. But yeah, light, so to speak, quotations here, right, goes through walls, always. But what do we mean by that? It means it relays light from one atom to the next through the ropes that interconnect them, except that when it comes out of the other side, it doesn't relay it faithfully as it came in. It came in at high frequency, visible range. We'll call that the high frequency here, okay? And it comes out at a low frequency, below the infrared, okay? Air, on the other hand, relays it exactly, or more or less exactly. There's very little difference in the refractive index of air and vacuum, okay? But we'll assume it relays it faithfully, okay? Like if it were vacuum. But that's what it does. It more or less relays it faithfully to the other side, okay? Now people say, well, why does it do it, Bill? That's for you to figure out, okay? I'm giving you the tools. I'm saying frequency is another factor you have to consider because it's related to temperature and to rigidity, two of the factors we talked about the other day. So all three of them are intertwined, okay? We have temperature, rigidity, and frequency. They all have something to do with each other, okay? What is frequency? It's a question of temperature. What is temperature? It's a question of rigidity, okay? They're all tied, okay? So when you analyze this, you have to include all of them together, and you have to juggle them in such a way that you can explain, once you have these tools, why water, air, glass are transparent, why a brick wall is not, or a steel beam is not. Okay, let's move on here. These are the walls, okay? Let me make that a little bigger. There you see the walls, okay, and the rope essentially interconnects all atoms in any of those media. In other words, when the light from the sun comes to your eye, okay, it's really being relayed through all the atoms of air that form the barrier between the surface of the earth and, the sun. So we have all this air covering our planet, and each one of those atoms is actually relaying the light from one atom to the next until it reaches your eye. It does so at the speed of light. So light always goes through all these walls. in a sense. And it's relayed through each one of these walls, okay? And what you have to do, your job is to look at the tools I gave you, to explain transparency and opacity. You got the tools: alignment, okay, and quantity, how many we have, okay, frequency, which we talked about now, and the other two, which are rigidity and, in other words, molecular structure. And then, which one did I miss? I missed the other one. I'll get it in a second. I get it here. Okay, so first thing, we have to destroy this notion of travel through, going through, moving through. There's no such moving through as quantum says, because for that you would have to use maybe particles or waves, and we can't use particles or waves, as we just saw. So you can't use particles or waves to give a physical interpretation to transparency. And so those people who use the term going through, passing through, moving through, they have to explain, or first they have to start by identifying what physical object is moving through, passing through, going through. Okay? So no, waves and particles do not move through glass, because the waves aren't waves and the particles aren't particles. Those are not physical entities. That's why we had to define the word object in science, to get rid of particles and waves. Okay, no such monsters in physics. You have to identify the physical object. First job of a physicist. You don't identify the physical object, you are not a physicist. Okay, you're a religious individual who just memorized stuff in high school and college and just regurgitates them for a physical interpretation, which is not physical at all. Conclusions. Okay, and I think here, okay, there we have it. What did I miss? Temperature was yellow. Okay. 5 mechanisms Mother Nature uses to do transparency, refraction, or opacity, reflection. And what do we have? We have alignment, okay, the polarization thing, quantity, temperature, stiffness, and frequency. And what is the icing on the cake? Icing on the cake, the little cherry. Quantum mechanics provides no physical interpretations for transparency or opacity. Why not? Well, because they don't have physical objects. Particles are not corpuscles, right? Waves are made of particles, and if not, they're made, like some mathematicians say out there, they're made of absolutely nothing. And nothing is made of particles. Okay, let's go with the questions we had since last time. Comments. One fellow says, does the rope form things besides atoms? What else can a rope weave into, in your opinion? Well, some of these people, they should start by learning the ABCs. They want to go, they ask college questions, and they haven't gone through kindergarten or elementary school. They have to start at the beginning, and the first thing is they never learn to talk. Okay, and so the key issue there is the word opinion. Okay, so let's educate this individual. Opinions is a definition or a synonym of religion. Okay, religion is opinions and beliefs. So we don't have opinions and beliefs in science. What we have is assumptions. Okay. And so, it's not a belief. The question is, when someone gives a presentation, okay, for example, in a conference or whatever, of physics, science, they have to make an assumption about the objects. And so he says, in your opinion, it's not a question of opinion, it's a question of making an assumption. He can make the assumption. He can talk about unicorns if he wants. He can introduce God if he wants, as an assumption. Does it mean you're going to accept his assumption? Are you going to challenge his assumption? Sure, you can challenge his assumption. But it's not a question of belief. He cannot come in there to the conference and say, it is my opinion, I believe. No, because now he's moved into religion. He's talking about something else that has nothing to do with science. In science we say, let us assume. Let us assume there are neutrons. Let us assume there are electrons. Let us assume they're weaved by threads. Another person can make a different assumption. He can say, let us assume the electron is a little bead. Let us assume it rolls around the atom. And then he explains his theory. And then your job is to say, well, hold it. I challenge you. I challenge you to what? Well, I challenge you to a duel. What are you challenging? You're saying, well, why doesn't that electron bead? Your assumption, why doesn't it fall to the nucleus? Why doesn't it spontaneously fly away? Why does it roll around within orbitals and then jumps back and forth between energy levels or whatever? That's what he's got to explain. If he can't explain that, he doesn't have a starting point. He can't even explain his theory. His theory is bunk. So we're talking about physical interpretations, not math, not experiments, not predictions. We're talking about give me an explanation of how Mother Nature runs her shop. And the way you're going to have to do it is beginning by telling me what your atom looks like. And it better not be a little bead going around the proton, okay? Like Mr. Niels Bohr said, Werner Heisenberg, and all these people. No, you can't use that model, the planetary model, which is the model they use to explain not only quantum jump, that's the one they use for ionization. The electron bead flies away for whatever reason, being pulled off, I guess, or spit off. And that's how I explain electricity. So you can't use that atom to explain any of those phenomena because your atom is bunk, is nonsense, it's poppycock. Okay, fellow says, another one with question, college question without having gone through kindergarten. Okay, it says, is there a rational reason for the ropes to be twisted? Why the ropes torque? My God. So many things wrong with that question, but let's see if we can summarize here. This is it, okay? Pay attention, okay? Here are the questions. Why is the speed of light 300,000 kilometers per second? Why is there something rather than nothing? You've heard that question before, probably. And Feynman, Richard Feynman, Nobel Prize of 1965, he says, why did Aunt Minnie go to the hospital? He says in his, you could call it explanation, his lack of an explanation for magnetism. Okay, you can look him up on YouTube. You'll find Feynman magnets, and that's where he tells you this little story about Aunt Minnie breaking her leg and going to the hospital. And why did Aunt Minnie go to the hospital? All these are irrational questions in physics. Okay, and again, Feynman never learned physics. And no idea what physics was about, especially if he doesn't understand the difference between a question of physics and a question of philosophy. So what he's asking is a question of philosophy, and he's phrasing it in an answer to a question of physics, which is how does a magnet work? So he uses this as an example, meaning he had no clue whatsoever the difference between philosophy and physics. Okay? And yeah, all these are irrational questions. Why is the speed of light 300,000 kilometers per second? Why is that an irrational question? Well, because the answer to all these questions is really, the first two, is because God said so. Okay, that's the answer. The answer is God wanted it that way. Okay? We inherited a universe that already has the speed of light, and we already inherited a universe that has matter in it. Okay? Why is there something rather than nothing? And that matter is already in motion, so you cannot ask why is there motion either, for example. All those are irrational questions because you're asking a question of purpose, of reason, of why someone did something in the context of physics. You're essentially putting God already in your picture. You're saying, why did God make the speed of light 300,000 kilometers per second? Why did God make something rather than nothing? Why did God put things in motion? That's what you're asking. You're asking a question of purpose and reason and not a question of what? Mechanisms and causes. Okay? And that's why these are irrational questions. They're philosophy questions, reason and purpose. Those are questions of philosophy. And you can't mix philosophy with physics. Okay? You want to do philosophy, do philosophy. Okay? You can't ask a why question of that nature. The why questions have to be related to causes and mechanism. Why did the pen fall to earth, you know? Meaning, what caused? What's the mechanism? Then you're asking a question of physics. Why did Bill let go of the pen? That's not a question of physics. Okay? I hope people understand the difference between physics and philosophy. Feynman did not, and he got a Nobel Prize. Okay, Bill, can you clarify some things? Okay, let's see if we can. In the rope hypothesis, and I hope I understand correctly, the light rope is two threads with electrical and magnetic properties, but those threads are immaterial, which I define as something you can touch. You can't touch, sorry, immaterial, something you can't touch. There are no atoms or electrons or particles, but you can see and feel. For example, feeling heat. Well, yeah, the problem is he's got the wrong definitions. He's got irrational definitions. Not wrong. Wrong means it's my opinion. No, he has an irrational definition because he's saying that it's what he can, an object, matter, right? Matter is the set of objects that exist. He's saying that's what you can see or touch. And that's where he's got the problem. No, an object is not that which you can see or touch. Because first you need two objects to do seeing or touching. You need another object, okay? And so here we put it up there so that maybe he can learn, okay? The definition of the word object destroys all religions, okay? Once we define the word object, all religions go down the drain, especially mathematical physics. An object is not that which you can see or touch. An object is that which has shape. Shape is the universal property of objects. There is no object you can imagine that doesn't have shape. Concepts don't have shape. Okay? So when he says something that you can see or touch, he's got the wrong definition. He's got an irrational definition. See and touch require two objects to make interface. Okay? And you can't see or touch that table that's on the other side of the planet, the one the Chinese man is eating his breakfast at. Okay? You can't see or touch it. Does that mean that table is not an object because you cannot see or touch it? How about the blind man? You know, he can't see or he can't see the moon. Is the moon not an object because the blind man can't see it? So see, touch are irrational criteria for the word object, and you must define the word object before you begin to do physics. Okay. Okay, so one fellow says, I propose that all atomic and particle forms, including rope or wave-like forms, are relatively transient manifestations of a single permanent fundamental object. Okay, yeah. We call it the thread. Okay, and what does he say? I describe it as a 2D, two-dimensional Mobius ribbon. Okay, that is a seething morass of repelling and intransigent gazillions lengths of that single object. My conceptualization appears to enter some people's brains, okay, but then nothing that makes sense comes out. I guess some people's brains are opaque, okay. The only problem I've got with the 2D ribbon is that once you twist it or you do anything with it, you got 3D. Okay, you got a third dimension there somewhere. Okay, that's one issue. The other one is that I cannot imagine a 2D anything floating in space. Okay, I use that sometimes to make fun of God. You know, I say, well, God created a square and he can put it there if he wants, a sheet, a two-dimensional sheet. He can do it. He's all powerful. He can do it. But Mother Nature, I don't think she's as powerful as God. She cannot make squares and triangles out there in space. They are objects, but they don't exist. Why? Because they don't have location, and they don't have location because they're 2D. And 2D would have no location here. You have to remember also that squares and triangles and so on, they're usually subsets of 3D objects. Okay? In fact, I think all of them are. Maybe there's an exception I don't know about, but all 2D are subsets of 3Ds. Okay, cross sections, whatever. You know, what is a square? It's a piece of a cube, a side of a cube. What is a circle? It's, you know, chop the ball in half and you'll get a circle, you know, and so on. More or less like that. It's a cross section. Okay, another fellow says, now light rope is taut between two atoms. Yeah, it's taut. Okay, you know, it's like the tightest thing you can imagine. Okay, but in space there is nothing, or rather there are no material, no atom. Okay, okay. Does this mean the rope can be extremely long distance? Let's say between the sun and the earth. Is outer space full of electromagnetic ropes? Um, you know, the question, why don't these people ask these questions of quantum mechanics? See, no one ever thought of these questions in terms of quantum mechanics. Whether a particle goes through another particle, whether two particles can be at the same place. They have no problem with quantum mechanics saying that. As soon as I say two ropes can cross each other, say, what do you mean two ropes can cross each other? I get my ropes here at home and they don't cross each other, you know. Why didn't they say that when quantum said that two particles go through each other? Why didn't they say that when two particles can occupy the same space? Why did they ask the question when a particle can be at two places at once? So the first issue is, please ask those questions first of quantum mechanics before you ask the questions of the rope hypothesis. We need to destroy quantum mechanics before we can replace it with a rope, right? Okay, but here it is. Let's answer this gentleman. Can there be gazillions of stars and planets in a galaxy? Can you imagine that? I mean, is that unimaginable? Can there be gazillions of point particles forming space-time? Okay. Remember, what is space-time? A bunch of events. What's an event? A point in space-time. So you have all these gazillions of points, and that's what space-time is. What each point is surrounded by, what encapsulates each point, well, for that you got to ask a relativist. I'm not smart enough. Can photons and gravitons be seen, touched? I mean, he's talking about seeing and touching, you know. Does light travel or extend from the Andromeda galaxy to your eyes? Does it travel or extend? He may not know what I'm talking about, so let's enlighten him. Here it is, okay? Here's the wave, okay? You see that the wave is traveling from the Andromeda galaxy to us. Or does it stretch? I mean, where does the wave begin? Where does it end? That's the question you need to answer. Okay? And so here's the rope model, okay? And you can see that it just extends from the Andromeda galaxy to your eye. So there is no traveling through or traveling at all. What we're saying is the rope torque's in place. That's why it's so fast. Okay? So the question for those who vouch for the wave is first, what is a wave? But even if we concede the wave, let's just concede it for the sake of argument. Does that wave travel like a little sailboat? Okay? And if so, where does it begin? Where does it end? Where does a wave begin? Halfway? I mean, it starts in an atom, but does it just fly off like a little sailboat? Or is it attached to another wave, which is attached to another wave like there? Is it a continuous wave from Andromeda all the way to your eye? Can it stretch that long if it's a wave? What kind of animal is this? See, under the rope, it's very straightforward. The rope is a two-twine thread entity. And so you can imagine it, and it just stretches. It's very thin, it's unimaginably thin, and it's unimaginably long. Every piece of matter in the universe is made of this thread. There's a closed loop thread that underlies all matter. Okay, so we have a consistent hypothesis, and we're using objects, so we're doing physics. On the other hand, what is a wave? What is a transverse wave? A bunch of vectors? That's math. That's not physics. You can't give a physical interpretation with a famous wave. But even if you concede the wave, does it stretch all the way from Andromeda, or does it travel like a sailboat? So that's the question for homework. We'll see you on Wednesday, and on Wednesday we're going to have Owens present. We're going to have a live chat, live answers that we're going to try to give you. And so it's a time to embarrass us. Okay, so we'll see you on Wednesday. Bye-bye.